a deadly snowstorm, a lone mountain road, and one former soldier who just wanted a quiet life. But when he spots blinking lights buried in the snow, his past comes rushing back, and within minutes, he's forced to make a life or death decision. What he doesn't know yet is that the man he's about to save once saved his life years ago, and this rescue will change both their futures forever. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe and like the video, and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Now let's jump into the story. Jonah Brent lived in a place where silence had weight, deep in the northern Wyoming hills where the wind carved paths through the snow and trees whispered old secrets. He had found the peace he had been searching for. His cabin sat alone, 15 miles from the nearest town, hidden behind rows of pine and bare aspen trees. Some people might call it isolation. Jonah called it healing. At 44, Jonah was not like the others in town. He spoke little, kept to himself, and moved with quiet purpose. Those who knew him said he had the kind of eyes that had seen more than they should, eyes that didn't flinch even when everything else did. Most people didn't know about his past. He never spoke of his time in the military, never mentioned the years spent in dangerous places far from home, but the scars on his arms and the old wound in his right leg told their own story. After leaving the service, Jonah found work at a local repair garage in a town called Clayton's Pass. His hands, once used for weapons and survival, now turned wrenches and fixed engines. Ralph, his boss, always said, "If Jonah can't fix it, it's broken for good." Customers liked him because he was honest, quick, and never complained. But even at work, Jonah kept a quiet distance, kind but not close, friendly but always a little apart. His life followed a rhythm. He woke every morning at 5, ran 5 miles through snow or sun, did 100 push-ups and sit-ups, and made coffee strong enough to wake the dead. His truck, a dark green pickup, was always ready. In the back, he kept a full emergency kit, blankets, food, first aid supplies, tow cables, and flares. Habits, he would say, die hard. In the winter, when snowstorms blanketed the hills and most stayed indoors, Jonah became more useful than ever. When stranded drivers called the garage, others hesitated. Not Jonah. His truck had chains on the tires, fuel in reserve, and recovery gear strapped tight. He never said no to someone in need. On a Friday morning in late December, the weather forecast was grim. A massive storm was coming. Radio alerts buzzed across the airwaves, warning people to stay home. "This is the worst in 50 years, the announcers said. "Stay indoors. Travel only for emergencies." By noon, snow was already falling thick and fast. Ralph closed the garage early and told everyone to get home before the roads turned to ice. Jonah nodded, grabbed his bag, and headed out into the rising wind. The sky had turned a dull gray, and the snowflakes stung like dust in a sandstorm as he drove up the winding road toward his cabin. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He had driven this road hundreds of times, but today it felt different. Each gust of wind pushed against his truck like a hand trying to shove him off the edge. The road, once clear, now vanished under white. Jonah slowed down, switching to four-wheel drive. He leaned forward, peering through the blur of snow. In moments like these, memories returned, not just from the military, but from the coldest missions. He remembered a mission in Siberia where they had to extract a hostage during a snowstorm, worse than this. One wrong step then had cost a teammate his life. Jonah shook the memory away. The past was gone, but the instincts remained. His cabin was still 10 miles ahead when the storm grew fiercer. He turned off the radio. The alerts repeated the same warning. Stay indoors. Extreme danger. But Jonah had learned long ago that fear didn't help in a storm. Skill, calm, and timing did. The snow now covered the road entirely. Only his memory guided him forward. He knew each curve, every turn. Still, it wasn't enough to make him feel safe. He whispered to himself, not prayers but reminders. Stay sharp, don't rush, listen to the wind. Then something changed. Through the wall of white, a faint orange light blinked on the side of the road. Jonah narrowed his eyes. Hazard lights. Someone was out there. A car maybe. Or worse. He slowed down, almost stopping. The lights barely cut through the snow. His mind raced. Stopping could be dangerous. The cold was deadly now, -15 degrees, maybe lower with the wind. But someone might be trapped, hurt, or freezing. And that was something he couldn't drive past. Jonah pulled over, set the brake, and reached for the heavier coat behind his seat. He slipped on thick gloves, wrapped a scarf around his neck, and reached into the back for his emergency gear. Rope, flashlight, medical kit. He tied one end of the rope to his belt and the other to the door handle of his truck. That way, he'd always find his way back. Even if the snow turned the world blind before stepping out, he looked at the lights again. They were barely blinking now. As he opened the door, the cold struck him like a wave. Wind howled, snow swirled, and darkness pressed in on every side. He stepped out slowly, leaning into the wind, each footstep careful and firm. He began walking toward the lights, counting each step. 15 steps, then 20. The snow was deeper than he expected. The lights grew brighter, but the air grew colder. Jonah didn't know who he would find in that car, or what shape they'd be in, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't leaving them behind. The snow stung Jonah's face like tiny shards of glass. He moved forward, counting each step, holding the rope tied to his belt like it was his lifeline. The wind howled so loudly it drowned out even the sound of his boots crunching in the snow. He had faced storms before, but this one felt alive, angry, wild, and cold enough to freeze skin in minutes. As he neared the blinking lights, the shape of the vehicle became clearer. It was a small silver sedan, half buried in a snowbank. Its back end was tilted and the right side looked lower, like it had slid off the road and into a shallow ditch. Jonah crouched beside the car and wiped snow from the driver's side window with a gloved hand. He peered inside. A man sat slumped in the driver's seat, barely moving. His hands were trembling, his face pale and his eyes glassy. The man looked older, maybe in his early 60s, with short gray hair and a deep cut above his eyebrow. His breath fogged the glass in weak bursts. Jonah knocked hard on the window. The man blinked slowly, then turned his head. Confusion was written all over his face. Jonah shouted through the glass, "Can you hear me?" But the man didn't respond. Jonah tried the door. It was jammed, the frame bent from the angle of the car and packed tightly with snow. He braced himself and pulled harder. After a long struggle, the door creaked open with a groan, and a gust of frozen air rushed into the car. "I'm here to help," Jonah shouted, kneeling beside the man. "Can you move?" The man nodded slightly, but when he tried to shift, he winced and grabbed his leg. Jonah saw it right away. The dashboard had crumpled, pinning the man's left leg beneath it. There was blood on his pant leg and his hands were too cold to grip anything. Jonah quickly assessed the situation. The man was suffering from early hypothermia. The cut on his head meant possible concussion. His leg was likely injured, maybe fractured. But the worst danger was the cold. They had minutes before his body shut down completely. "Listen," Jonah said firmly. "I need to get you out now. It might hurt, but we can't wait." The man didn't speak, but he gave a small, his teeth chattered as he tried to stay awake. Jonah pulled the flashlight from his jacket and checked the area around the leg. The dashboard had crushed the lower half of the car. Jonah reached into his coat and pulled out a multi-tool. Using the blade and a short metal rod from his rescue kit, he jammed the tool between the frame and the dashboard, trying to create leverage. He pressed his weight into it. Metal creaked and groaned, but didn't move much. The wind screamed behind him and snow blew into the car. Jonah could feel the cold creeping into his own gloves now. He had to work faster. He repositioned the tool, adjusted the angle, and braced his legs. With one loud push, the dashboard shifted, just a few inches, but it was enough. "Pull your leg out now," he ordered. "Do it now." The man gritted his teeth and pulled. With a painful cry, he yanked his leg free. Jonah reached in, grabbed him under the arms, and helped guide him out of the car. The man's legs buckled as soon as he stood. "I can't walk," he whispered. Without hesitating, Jonah turned around and crouched. "Get on my back. Now." It took a moment, but the man managed to wrap his arms around Jonah's shoulders. Jonah stood, lifting him with a grunt. The man was lighter than he looked, but the snow made every step feel like a mile. Jonah tightened the rope around his waist and started walking back toward the truck, one slow step at a time. His boots sank into the snow. His breath came in clouds. The old pain in his right leg flared up, but he kept going. The man on his back shivered, his breathing shallow. Jonah talked to keep both of them alert. "Just a little further. We're almost there." The snow had already started to bury their tracks. Jonah kept his eyes on the faint line of the rope, praying it hadn't snapped. Each gust of wind hit like a slap to the face. But the lights of the truck finally came into view, glowing faintly through the snow. With a final push, Jonah reached the truck, opened the passenger door, and gently placed the man inside. He slammed the door shut and climbed into the driver's seat. He turned the engine on and cranked the heater to full blast. Then he grabbed a thermal blanket from the back and wrapped it around the man. The warmth filled the cab slowly. The man's shaking began to ease. His face, still pale, showed signs of returning life. Jonah reached into the glove box, took out a flashlight, and turned it on to check the man's face more closely. Then he froze. There was something familiar in those tired eyes, something that tugged at a memory long buried. "What's your name?" Jonah asked, voice quiet. The man looked at him, studying his face. His gaze dropped to Jonah's right hand, a scar across his knuckles. A flicker of recognition crossed the man's face. "Jonah Brent," the man said slowly. "You were in Unit 12. Rescue mission in the hills outside Karshan, 2009. Jonah blinked. "How do you know that?" The man gave a weak smile. "Because I was the medic who saved your life that day." Inside the truck, warm air hissed from the vents. The windows had begun to fog, but Jonah wasn't thinking about the cold anymore. He sat frozen in the driver's seat, staring at the older man wrapped in the thermal blanket. "You saved my life?" Jonah asked, barely above a whisper. The man nodded slowly. "Karshan. February 2009. You were hit in the leg, badly. We were losing you fast. I operated right there in the field. No lights, no time." Jonah remembered it now. The pain. The voices yelling. The night sky swirling overhead as he drifted in and out of consciousness. He had never known who kept him alive. Until now. "What's your name?" he asked. "Miles," the man replied. "Miles Harlan. Back then I was chief medic with a forward operations unit. After I patched you up, they moved me to another post. I never saw your team again." Jonah let out a long breath. Outside, the blizzard still roared, but inside the truck, something strange settled between them. Not silence, not tension, something more like understanding. "I thought I'd never meet you again," Jonah said, still processing. "I never got the chance to thank you." Miles gave a tired smile. "Looks like you just did. You saved my life tonight. Seems we're even now." Jonah shook his head. "This wasn't even. You were out there, alone, in the middle of a deadly storm. How did you end up on that road?" Miles shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "That's what I need to tell you. I wasn't just passing through." Jonah looked at him, waiting. "I came to find you," Miles said, "not by chance, by request." Jonah narrowed his eyes. "Whose request?" Miles hesitated, then reached into his coat. He pulled out a sealed envelope and handed it to Jonah. The outside was marked with a simple black emblem, one Jonah hadn't seen in years. "That's from a new program," Miles explained. "It's called Project Ember." Jonah didn't open the envelope yet. "What kind of program?" "A response unit," Miles said. "Not military, not civilian, something in between. They're building a network of elite trainers and rescue leaders, people with the kind of experience most never talk about. And they want you." Jonah stared at him. "Why me? I left that life. I've been out of it for almost 10 years. Miles nodded. "That's exactly why. We don't need soldiers. We need survivors, teachers, leaders. You've walked both roads, combat and civilian. That's rare. Jonah leaned back in his seat. So, the program sent you to recruit me? Yes, Miles said. But the accident wasn't planned. I was going to reach your cabin tomorrow after the storm passed. Fate had a different plan. Jonah looked away, out the window. Snow still fell in thick sheets, but he wasn't watching the storm anymore. He was thinking about the years he'd spent trying to forget who he used to be. I'm not sure I can do it again, he said quietly. I left for a reason. I needed quiet. After everything, I wasn't the same. Miles gave a slow nod. I understand. I felt the same when I retired. I thought I was done with the fight. But the world keeps changing. Storms are getting stronger. Fires are burning longer. People need help. And the ones who know how to give it? They're few. Jonah opened the envelope. Inside was a letter and a photo. The letter listed his military record in detail. Missions he hadn't spoken about in years. The photo showed a training center built high in a mountain range. The faces in the photo were determined, strong, ready to serve. They've been watching me? Jonah asked. Not watching, Miles said carefully. Tracking. You're considered a high-value asset. They didn't lose sight of you, not after Carson. Jonah folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. So what would I be doing? Training teams, Miles said. Teaching others how to survive in places most wouldn't dare to go. Cold weather, wildfires, floods, earthquakes. Project Ember is building a national response force, fast, quiet, and highly skilled. And you? Jonah asked. I'm part of the medical division, Miles said. Developing field training and emergency protocols. That was supposed to be my pitch, but then the storm had its own plans. Jonah looked down at his hands. They were steady. No tremble. No fear. Just calm. The kind of calm he only felt when doing something that mattered. He turned toward Miles. You really think I'm the right person for this? I know you are, Miles said. Because you didn't hesitate out there tonight, you acted. No backup, no orders, just instinct. That's the kind of person we need. The heater in the truck was doing its job now. Color was returning to Miles's face. The tremble in his hands had stopped. Outside, the snow was beginning to slow. Jonah stared into the dim light of the dashboard. He thought about the people he hadn't saved, the ones he had, the silence of his cabin, the weight of his past. Maybe this wasn't about going back to who he was. Maybe it was about becoming something new. The next morning, Jonah stood outside his cabin, the snow piled high around his boots. The blizzard had passed, but it had left behind a frozen world. Trees bent under the weight of snow, and the sun peeked through pale gray clouds, casting a cold light across the hills. Inside, Miles sat near the fire, wrapped in a thick blanket. His forehead was bandaged and a splint held his bruised leg steady. Jonah had done what he could with the supplies in his cabin, and Miles had begun to recover. The warmth, rest, and tea had helped, but both men knew that real help would be needed soon. Jonah stepped back inside, brushing snow from his coat. Weather's clearing, he said. I think we might get visitors. Miles looked up with a knowing smile. Not just any visitors. Jonah raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Before Miles could answer, the deep sound of rotor blades echoed through the valley. Jonah walked to the window. A military helicopter appeared over the ridge, its black shape cutting across the snowy sky. It hovered for a moment, then began to descend, landing in the flat clearing outside the cabin. Snow kicked up in waves around the helicopter as the blades slowed. Jonah opened the door and stepped outside. 3 figures exited the aircraft. One of them, tall and broad-shouldered, walked with the confidence of someone used to command. He extended a hand as he reached Jonah. Lieutenant Brent, the man said. I'm Commander Silas Kane, Director of Project Ember. Jonah shook, his hand firmly. You got here fast. We were monitoring the storm, Silas replied. When we got word Miles was found, we moved quickly, and now we're here for you. Inside the cabin, Miles greeted the commander with a nod. Silas turned back to Jonah and motioned to the table. May I explain? Jonah nodded, and the three sat down. A warm fire crackled nearby. Project Ember, Silas began, was created in response to a rising need. Climate disasters are increasing. Traditional rescue services are overwhelmed. We're building 5 elite training centers across the country, each one focused on different types of emergencies. He paused, letting the words settle. We need people who've seen real danger. People who don't freeze in chaos. People like you. Jonah leaned back in his chair. I'm not sure I'm the man you think I am anymore. Silas looked him straight in the eye. What you did last night says otherwise. You went into the worst blizzard in 50 years, alone. You rescued someone from a crushed vehicle. You didn't ask questions. You just acted. That's leadership. Jonah glanced at Miles, who gave him a small nod. You'd start as a lead. Trainer, Silas continued. But based on your record, we see you as a possible field commander. We're building teams that operate where others can't. Your cold weather and rescue background is rare. Jonah was quiet for a long time. He stared into the flames, thinking. He had built this life for peace, for distance, for healing. But maybe healing didn't mean hiding. Maybe it meant using his scars to help others survive. If I say yes, Jonah said slowly, I want control over training gear. Standard issue won't cut it. The team needs better tools, better kits. Real survival equipment. Silas smiled. Agreed. You'll help design it, Miles added. And you'll train a new generation to be more than responders. They'll be protectors. Jonah nodded. Then I'm in. Silas stood and extended his hand once more. Welcome to Project Ember. The helicopter blade started again, sending vibrations through the snowy ground. Jonah quickly packed a bag, just the essentials. As he zipped his coat and slung the strap over his shoulder, he looked back at the cabin. The quiet life had served its purpose. It had helped him remember who he was. But now, it was time to become something more. Miles limped over to him. You ready for this? Jonah gave a half smile. I think I always was. I just needed a reason. Then let's go give others theirs, Miles said. As Jonah climbed aboard the helicopter, he felt the engines rise beneath his feet. The world below grew smaller as they lifted into the air. The snowy hills stretched for miles, untouched and wild. But Jonah knew that somewhere out there, someone else would one day need help. And when that time came, he wouldn't be watching from a distance. He would be ready. 6 months later, Jonah stood on a snowy training field, surrounded by 20 men and women in cold weather rescue gear. They were the first class of Project Ember's mountain unit. He had trained them himself, through blizzards, cold nights, and impossible drills. The world will call you when things fall apart, Jonah told them at graduation. When it's too cold, too late, or too dangerous. That's when you step in. In the crowd, Miles watched proudly, now the program's lead medical advisor. Beside him stood Commander Silas, arms crossed, nodding with approval. Jonah's voice rose as he finished his speech. Remember, when most turn back, you go forward. When fear takes over, you bring calm. Because you are not just rescuers. You are the hope people pray for when no one else is coming. As the snow fell gently around them, the new team stood tall, ready to face whatever came next. Jonah Brent had found his purpose again, not in war, not in peace, but in saving lives when the world needed him most.